My name was once spoken with pride among the towers of Sundari, before smoke darkened its skies and the Beskar streets ran with the tears of our people. My armor bore the silver sheen of Clan Varen, my visor tinted in deep blue, the color of loyalty. The helmet's edges were scarred, the plates worn from years of battle, and beneath them, my face carried the quiet fatigue of too many campaigns. My jawline stayed sharp beneath the grime, a thin scar crossing from ear to chin, earned in the underlevels of Coruscant years ago. My eyes, gray like the storms over Kalevala, had seen too much, yet refused to close. My hands trembled not from fear, but from memory, and my voice carried the weight of someone who had sworn too many oaths and kept too few. When I stepped off the gunship, Mandalore's air felt strange, heavy with ash and the faint tang of burning metal. The city shimmered below the orange clouds like a dying ember. Bo-Katan's warriors moved in disciplined silence beside me, their visors catching flashes of flame from the distance. I was not one of them by blood, yet by purpose I stood among them, a loyal Mandalorian whose clan had vanished in the earlier purges. My duty now was simple: reclaim our home from the monster who called himself Maul. The landing zone was chaos wrapped in honor. Blaster bolts carved streaks of light across the sky, reflecting against shattered durasteel. Republic gunships roared overhead as Ahsoka Tano descended beside Captain Rex, their presence anchoring us in the storm. I had fought under Jedi before, but none carried the same calm defiance as her. When she removed her hood, the flames flickered in her blue and white lekku, and for a moment, hope flared inside me. Bo-Katan's voice broke through the comms. "We strike now. Maul's loyalists are retreating toward the throne room. No mercy. Mandalore must be ours again." I followed the order without hesitation, my boots clanging over the cracked durasteel bridges, each step echoing across memories of the Mandalore that once was. The air was thick with the smell of plasma fire and the metallic bite of ion discharge. We moved through tight corridors, slicing through Maul's shadow collective soldiers, traitors wearing our armor, our symbols, twisted against us. A blaster bolt grazed my shoulder, searing the plating. I turned and fired twice, dropping a horned helmet into silence. The city trembled as explosions rippled in the distance. Every wall, every echo of battle reminded me of how far we had fallen, how the Mandalore's throne had become a curse passed between tyrants and ghosts. By the time we reached the Grand Plaza, the sky itself was aflame. Jetpacks screamed overhead, smoke clawed upward, and the sound of dying warriors filled the air like a dirge. I caught a glimpse of Maul's crimson blades spinning through the chaos in the distance, a viper's dance of fury and control. Even from afar, I could feel the pull of his hatred, the dark gravity that had dragged Mandalore into this endless cycle of war. I remember thinking then, before the worst of it began, that maybe this would finally end, that we could rebuild something from the ruins. I didn't yet know that what waited for us was not victory, but betrayal. That survival would demand more than courage or skill. It would demand losing everything that still made me human. The night sky bled red over Sundari, the last light of the setting sun swallowed by the fires of battle. The durasteel towers that once reached for the heavens now leaned like broken spears, the reflections warping across shattered glass. My armor was coated in soot and plasma scorch, my breath rasping inside the helmet as we advanced through the upper citadel. Bo-Katan's orders came through the comm with sharp precision, her voice like a blade slicing through chaos. Somewhere above, Ahsoka was hunting Maul, And we, those of us who still stood, were the thin line holding back the madness that spread like a plague through the city. We had driven Maul's Shadow Collective forces back into the tunnels beneath the capital, but they fought like cornered beasts. Every step forward cost us blood. I remember ducking behind a fallen archway as a missile screamed past, the impact throwing me backward. Dust and light and pain became one soundless blur. When my vision cleared, I found myself half buried beneath rubble. A hand reached down, Asha's. She was my oldest friend, a fellow survivor of the purge of Clan Varen. Her armor bore the same colors as mine, but her visor had a jagged crack through it, and her breathing came hard through the comm. "She's still alive," she said, her tone both relief and accusation. "Barely," I muttered, pushing myself up. "What's our position?" "Trapped between Maul's remnants at the old Senate Hall. The clones are stretched thin. If we're lucky, we reach the tunnels before Maul's trap closes." That word, trap, hung in the air like poison. Even before we reached the old hall, I could feel it. The eerie silence, the faint hum of power resonating through the walls, the unmistakable chill of something unnatural. Maul had always been more than a warlord. He was a wound in the Force itself, festering, cunning. When we entered the chamber, the light dimmed as if the very air recoiled. A dozen of his elite guards waited, their crimson visors glowing in the gloom, vibroblades drawn and ready. The battle that followed was chaos distilled into motion. Jetpacks roared, blades clashed, sparks rained like fiery snow. I parried a strike, countered with a blaster to the gut plate, and spun to cover Asha as she drove her knife through another's throat seam. The sound of Maul's laughter, low, cold, echoing through the structure, slithered over the comms. "You fight well, for ghosts," he mocked, "but your fate was sealed the moment you trusted the Jedi." I wanted to answer, but there was no time. The floor trembled beneath us, a hollow boom that sent cracks snaking through the marble. Above, debris fell in a storm of stone and metal. The ceiling tore open, and for a split second, I saw Maul himself, his yellow eyes glinting, his horns catching the firelight, before he vanished into shadow again. Then came the real terror, the feeling of being toyed with. Every corridor we turned into had already been sealed behind us. Explosives hidden beneath the walkways began to detonate in sequence, cutting off our retreat, forcing us deeper into the labyrinth he had built. Asha looked at me as the walls shook. "He's not fighting to win," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. "He's fighting to bury us here." And she was right. By the time we found an escape route, the upper city was collapsing above us. The Republic ships withdrew to regroup, and Mandalore burned like a star collapsing in on itself. We didn't know it yet, but the trap wasn't Maul's alone. It was the galaxy's. We were walking straight into the fall of everything we'd ever sworn to protect. We regrouped beneath the wreckage of the old Senate Hall, the air thick with smoke and the hiss of leaking coolant lines. The glow from the city above filtered down through cracks in the ceiling, turning the dust into swirls of blood-red light. I sat with my helmet off for the first time in hours, sweat streaking down through the soot on my face, my hands trembling as I tried to reload my blaster. Asha crouched beside me, running diagnostics on her armor. The comms were half dead, but the occasional burst of static carried fragments of familiar voices, clone chatter, Republic code frequencies. Rex's voice cut through once, sharp and urgent, before vanishing again into the void. Something was wrong, the kind of wrong you could feel in your bones. The clones had gone quiet, not the tactical kind of silence, but the eerie absence that follows a scream. I adjusted my comms frequency again, searching for a signal. Static, then execute Order 6, and the rest dissolved into white noise. Asha looked up. "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, we heard footsteps approaching from the tunnel's mouth. Familiar armor patterns, white with blue markings, the 501st. Relief washed through me at first. "Finally," I said, rising to meet them. "We thought you were—" The lead trooper raised his DC-15 and fired. The bolt missed my head by inches, searing across the wall. Instinct took over. I dove behind a column as Asha opened fire in return, her shots echoing in the confined space. The clones advanced in perfect formation, wordless, relentless. Their movements were too exact, their aim too cold. It wasn't confusion or miscommunication, this was execution. "What in the void are they doing?" Asha hissed. I said, "They've turned on us. Something's happened. Something big." We fought our way through the tunnel, the sound of blaster fire deafening, the air thick with burning plasma and concrete dust. I recognized the faces behind the visors, men we'd trained beside, eaten beside, trusted with our lives. And now they moved like machines, eyes empty behind their helmets. At one point, a grenade rolled between us. I grabbed Asha and shoved her behind a pillar as the blast tore through the corridor. My ears rang, my vision blurred. When I came to, 2 clones were dragging her limp body from the rubble. I barely remember what I did next, only flashes. A shout, a charge, a knife through plastoid armor. My hands were covered in blood, some theirs, some hers. When the last of them fell, I crawled to her side. Asha was breathing, but shallowly. Her visor was shattered completely now, the face beneath pale and still. "Don't stop," she whispered, her hand gripping my arm. "Find out why. Survive this." Then she went still, her fingers slipping away. I sat there in the flickering red gloom, surrounded by the dead. Friends, brothers, enemies all at once. And for the first time since the war began, I felt truly alone. The echoes of blaster fire faded into silence, replaced by the faint hum of engines above. I looked up through a gap in the ceiling and saw Republic cruisers turning away from the burning city, their lights vanishing into orbit. That was the moment I understood. Whatever Maul had started, whatever we thought we were fighting for, it was over. The Republic we bled for was dying, replaced by something colder, something vast. And we were the ones left behind, to burn with the ashes.
The tunnels beneath Sundari became a graveyard of echoes. Every step I took rang hollow against durasteel floors smeared with ash and plasma scorch, the silence closing in around me like a vice. Above, I could still hear the rumble of detonations, buildings collapsing, ships screaming through the upper atmosphere. But down here, the war had narrowed to a single heartbeat, mine. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the glow of emergency lights painting everything in a sickly red haze. I moved slowly, blaster drawn, my visor flickering with static from the interference that now haunted every frequency. They were hunting me. I could hear them. The clones, my brothers in arms hours ago, moving in tight formations through the lower corridors. Their voices were gone, replaced by the clipped mechanical rhythm of soldiers executing a command without question. Every time they spoke into their comms, it was in cold precision. Target sighted. Confirm kill zone. No survivors. I ducked into an access shaft, crawling through cables and steam, the metal biting against my armor. My shoulder wound throbbed from the earlier fight, but pain had become a dull companion now, something I clung to just to stay awake. I counted each breath like a prayer, pressing forward until I emerged into an abandoned hangar, half swallowed by rubble. A fallen gunship lay on its side, wings twisted, smoke curling from its engines. Inside, I found a few supplies, half a power cell, a cracked data pad, and a small holo still flickering. A clone laughing beside a Jedi I recognized from Coruscant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I turned the holo off. Their footsteps drew closer. I could see flashlights cutting through the smoke. I slipped beneath the wreckage, moving as silently as the ghosts I'd buried. One of the clones stepped close, his armor caked with ash, visor scanning. I could hear his breath through the vocoder. He hesitated for just a heartbeat, as if some fragment of recognition still lived behind that helmet. Then another voice crackled over his comms, "Execute," and his rifle snapped upward. I fired first. The shot took him through the chest plate, dropping him instantly. The other two turned, shouting through the static. I threw a stun charge and dove for cover, the blast lighting the hangar like lightning. When the smoke cleared, they were both down, motionless. I didn't stop to check if they were dead. Survival left no room for mercy now. I moved deeper, following maintenance tunnels that wound beneath the capital like veins. The deeper I went, the more signs of slaughter I found. Bodies of Mandalorians and clones alike, stacked in the shadows. The war had turned inward, eating itself alive. Somewhere, in the distance, I heard the muffled hum of a lightsaber. Brief, distant, gone. Ahsoka, maybe. Or Maul. I couldn't tell anymore which one I feared more. At one junction, I paused and caught sight of my reflection in a broken viewport. Armor cracked and blackened, eyes hollow, face streaked with soot and blood. I hardly recognized myself. The warrior I once was, honor-bound, loyal, proud, was fading beneath the mask of someone else, a survivor. Then came the voice, faint through my comm, Bo-Katan's. "If you can hear this, retreat to the catacombs. We regroup and escape before the fleet fires again. Hurry!" Her voice was raw, desperate, alive. I turned toward the deeper tunnels, forcing my body to move faster, the sound of marching clones fading behind me. For the first time since the betrayal, there was a spark of direction. Not hope, just motion, just the need to keep going. Because now, it wasn't about victory. It was about staying alive long enough to see what the galaxy was becoming without us.
The catacombs beneath Sundari were older than Mandalore's wars, older even than the domed cities themselves. They were built when the clans still warred with each other under the ashes of the surface, a labyrinth of tunnels carved from Beskar ore and rock. As I descended, the air turned cold, thick with the taste of dust and centuries. My armor's sensors flickered as the walls narrowed, light from my visor casting long shadows that seemed to breathe. I found others, what was left of them, gathered near the entrance to the deeper tunnels. Bo-Katan's voice was true. A dozen Mandalorians, all weary, armor dented, visors cracked, gathered in a half circle around a single flickering lamp. Among them was Asha's younger brother, Kareth, his crimson-marked armor dulled by ash. He turned when I entered, and for a moment I saw Asha in his stance, the same sharp defiance, the same quiet fire. "You made it," he said, relief softening his voice. "Barely," I replied. "Bo-Katan?" He pointed deeper into the catacombs, rallying whoever's left. "The clones are sweeping the city. We don't have long before they start burning what's below." We moved quickly through the tunnels, carrying what supplies we could salvage. The deeper chambers were filled with echoes of the past, old murals of warriors, faded banners, the bones of our ancestors sealed into the stone. We passed them in silence, as if too afraid to wake the ghosts. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. Then came the rumble, distant, low, growing closer. The clones had found the upper entrances. We could hear their detonators echoing through the stone. Bo-Katan appeared from the shadows, her armor streaked with soot, her helmet clipped at her side. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw not a leader, but someone who had lost everything she'd fought to reclaim. "We're sealing the lower tunnels," she said. "The clones won't stop. They're purging every level." "There are still people down here," Kareth said, stepping forward. "I know," she answered quietly. "That's why we hold them off as long as we can." We fortified the narrow passages with fallen stone and scrap plating, setting traps along the choke points. The sound of blaster fire grew closer, echoing down the corridor like thunder. Then the fighting began again, up close, brutal, desperate. The clones moved with precision, their white armor ghostly against the black stone. We met them with blades and fire, our war cries swallowed by the confined space. In the chaos, a thermal detonator rolled toward our line. Kareth lunged forward, kicking it back down the tunnel before the blast took him with it. The explosion collapsed part of the ceiling, sealing the passage, but he was gone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the silence broke with shouts, gunfire, rage. Asha's brother had bought us time. Bo-Katan grabbed my shoulder, her voice hard through the comm. "We fall back, now." We retreated deeper, the walls trembling with the weight of the destruction above. The city was collapsing in on itself. Even down here, we could feel the world dying. I glanced back once at the sealed passage, the smoke curling through the cracks, the faint glimmer of fire where Kareth had stood. I wanted to believe it had meant something, that his death, Asha's death, all of this would be remembered. But deep down, I knew history would bury us like the tunnels themselves. By the time we reached the lower chambers, Mandalore was no longer a city. It was a furnace. The air shook with distant detonations, the sound of orbital bombardment rumbling through the earth like the heartbeat of a dying god. Each shockwave sent clouds of dust drifting from the ceiling, settling over our armor like ash from a funeral pyre. I remember the glow from the cracks in the walls, a dull orange pulse that felt alive, as though the planet itself wept for what it had become. Bo-Katan's group had thinned to half its number. Some were wounded, some too exhausted to go on. We'd lost comms entirely. The surface was gone. The last thing we heard before the channels died was a clone officer's voice. "Purge complete. Initiate final sweep." We hid in a collapsed tunnel where the catacombs met the underworks of the old power grid. Pipes hissed around us, leaking steam that smelled of oil and iron. Someone started whispering prayers in Mandoa, old words of honor and death. I sat apart, cleaning the grime from my visor, though I could barely see through it now. I thought of Asha, of Kareth, of every face that had vanished into flame. Survival had become a kind of betrayal. Bo-Katan crouched beside me, her expression unreadable behind the dim flicker of her HUD. "When this ends," she said quietly, "the galaxy will forget us. They'll call this liberation, but we'll know what it really was. The death of Mandalore." She nodded once, then turned her gaze toward the firelight flickering through the tunnel. "The clones won't stop until the city is ash. If they find us here, we die. If we stay, we die slower. Either way, we make it mean something." We heard them before we saw them, the rhythmic stomp of boots, the metallic click of rifles readying in unison. Blue light from scanners swept across the corridor, slicing through the smoke. We opened fire before they could see us clearly. The tunnel erupted in blaster fire. The narrow space became a storm of sparks and echoes, red and blue light flashing across the stone. The air filled with the stench of ozone and burning plastoid. I dropped too, then ducked behind a pipe as a barrage shattered the wall beside me. Bo-Katan hurled a grenade, the explosion sending shockwaves through the floor. Chunks of metal rained down. I could hear the clones shouting orders, calm, methodical, unstoppable. A blaster bolt caught one of our warriors square in the chest. He fell without a sound. Another tried to drag him back, but the next volley cut her down. The walls were caving in, and still we fought, because that's what Mandalorians do when there's nothing left. Then, the world above us screamed. A thunderous roar shook the chamber as something massive exploded on the surface. Maybe a reactor, maybe a ship, but the shockwave tore through the catacombs like a tidal wave. The ground split, the ceiling cracked, and the light vanished in an instant. I was thrown backward, slammed against the wall, my visor flickering out. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Bo-Katan disappearing into the collapsing tunnel, shouting my name through the comms as the world fell apart. When I came to, I was alone again, buried, alive. The fires had reached the lower levels. I could feel the heat crawling through the stone. My air supply was thinning. I pushed aside debris with trembling arms, each movement slower than the last. And somewhere above, through the distant roar of destruction, I could hear it. The voice of Maul carried on the wind, laughing through the death of a world he'd already abandoned. Mandalore was burning. The Republic was dying. And I was still breathing.
When the smoke finally thinned, I crawled from the wreckage into what had once been the Undercity, now a maze of molten glass and twisted steel. The air shimmered with heat, every breath scraping my throat raw. Above, I could see the broken dome of Sundari, its great plates shattered like ancient stained glass, spilling red sunlight into the ruin. The silence was worse than the bombardment. No voices, no blaster fire, just the soft crackle of a world burning itself out. I stumbled through the debris, each step sinking into ash and rubble. My armor was half melted along one side, the paint burned away. The Mandalorian crest on my pauldron was almost gone now, only a faint outline of silver beneath black soot. My left arm hung uselessly at my side, nerves shot from the blast. But I was alive, and that felt like betrayal all over again. Through the haze, I found the remnants of a Republic gunship, one of ours, marked with the sigil of the 332nd Company. The hatch hung open, its hull scarred by blaster fire. Inside, there were bodies. Clones, Mandalorians, all burned together into one indistinguishable mass. I stepped over them quietly, trying not to look too long at the familiar armor patterns. The cockpit flickered weakly, one screen still powered. I leaned closer, wiping the soot from the glass. There it was, the transmission that had ended everything. Palpatine's voice, calm and absolute. "Execute Order 66. The words repeated, distorted by static, echoing through the wreckage like a ghost. I shut it off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the planet's gravity. I made my way toward the southern cliffs, where the dome had collapsed into the open air. Beyond the ruins, the wasteland stretched endless, gray sands rippling beneath the glow of Mandalore's dying sun. Somewhere out there, Bo-Katan might have survived, maybe others too. But deep down, I knew the truth. Those still alive were no longer warriors, they were fugitives. I found a small shuttle half buried in the sand, its hull cracked but intact enough to fly. I stripped my armor's power cells to reroute into its ignition core. The system stuttered, coughed, and finally came to life with a weak hum. As the engines warmed, I turned one last time toward the city, the heart of Mandalore, now a tomb of fire and smoke. That's when I saw them in the distance. Imperial ships descending through the clouds. Their silhouettes were unfamiliar but unmistakable. New symbols gleaming on their hulls. The Republic was gone. In its place came something colder, sharper, and eternal. The Empire. For a long moment, I just stood there watching their shadows spread across the planet. I could feel it even from here, the change, the final tightening of a noose we never saw coming. All the loyalty, all the sacrifice, all the blood spilled for the Republic meant nothing now.
The clones were its executioners. We were its debris. I climbed aboard the shuttle, hands shaking as I took the controls. The engine screamed in protest as I lifted off, sand and ash swirling below. Through the viewport, I watched Mandalore shrink beneath me, its once proud cities now glowing embers beneath the Imperial fleet. I wanted to believe I'd come back someday, that I'd rebuild, reclaim, rise again. But even as the stars spread open above me, I knew the truth that burned colder than any fire below. Mandalore wasn't lost. It had been erased. And all that remained were those of us too stubborn to die.
The stars looked different from above Mandalore. Dimmer somehow, blurred by the veil of smoke rising from the planet below. I guided the shuttle through the thinning atmosphere, hands steady despite the tremor running through me. The engines whined against the pull of gravity, but the ship climbed, dragging me farther from the ruin that had once been home. As the clouds cleared, I saw it all from orbit, the black scar where Sundari had stood, fire still crawling through the cracks of the dome, Imperial cruisers descending in formation like vultures over a corpse. I set the autopilot long enough to remove my helmet. The air inside the cockpit was heavy with the smell of ozone and burned circuitry. My reflection in the viewport startled me, face pale beneath grime, eyes red-rimmed and hollow, jaw clenched so tight it ached. The scar along my cheek had split open again, a thin line of blood tracing the curve of my jaw. It didn't matter. None of it did now. Bo-Katan's last words before the tunnels fell echoed in my mind. We make it mean something. But what did survival mean when everything you'd fought for was gone? The clans were scattered. The honor we had, lived by, ashes. Our children would grow up under Imperial banners, taught to forget what it meant to be Mandalorian. And those of us who remembered would live as ghosts, hunted by the very soldiers we once called brothers. The shuttle's sensors picked up a transmission. Imperial code, encrypted, efficient, merciless. I killed the receiver before it could lock on. They were sweeping the debris field, securing the new order. I angled the ship toward the outer rim, away from the patrol routes, away from everything familiar. The galaxy ahead looked infinite and cold. I thought of the faces I'd lost, Asha's fierce smile as she pulled me from the rubble, Kareth's last defiant stand, Bo-Katan's eyes blazing with stubborn hope. They haunted the silence between the stars. I whispered their names into the cockpit, my voice breaking halfway through. There was no one left to hear. Hours passed, or maybe days. The line between them had blurred somewhere between grief and exhaustion. Eventually, the nav computer guided me toward a barren moon on the edge of the system, uninhabited and forgotten. I landed the shuttle in a canyon of black stone, engines sputtering to their last breath. When the silence settled, it was complete. No comms, no pursuit, just the faint whisper of wind through the rock. I stepped outside. The air was cold, the sky awash of dying stars. From here, Mandalore was just a dull red shimmer in the distance, still burning beneath the shadow of Imperial ships. I knelt in the dust, tracing the sigil of Clan Varen into the ground with a gloved finger. The gesture felt small, almost foolish, but it was all I had left. I swore then, not to avenge, not to rebuild, but to remember. To carry the story of what we were, what we lost, and how we burned for it. Because if memory died, then so did Mandalore. So I sat beneath the empty sky, armor cracked and soul hollow, watching the dawn rise over a world that would never know our names. And even as the stars faded one by one, I whispered the only words that still mattered. This is the way. The fires of Mandalore had long since burned out, but in my dreams I still heard them. The roar of collapsing towers, the scream of gunships tearing through the air, the silence that followed when everything was gone. Some nights I woke reaching for my helmet, expecting the smell of ash and plasma, only to find the cold quiet of exile. Survival had a taste, bitter, metallic, and endless. I made a home of sorts in the emptiness, repaired what I could of my armor, built a fire that barely held against the wind. Each spark reminded me of the forge fires that once lit our halls, the laughter that had filled them before the wars. It was strange how memory could warm and wound in the same breath. Word reached me slowly, through scavenger ships and smugglers passing the rim. The Empire had claimed Mandalore. The clans were shattered, hunted, enslaved. Bo-Katan still fought somewhere in the shadows, refusing to let the last flame die. I wanted to believe she would succeed. I wanted to believe in anything. But I had learned one truth in the ashes of Sundari. Sometimes survival isn't victory. Sometimes it's the burden left to those who lived when they shouldn't have. So I wait, watching the stars, listening to the ghosts that speak in the wind. And though the galaxy forgets us, I will not. I will remember every name, every scream, every flicker of light that dared to burn against the dark, because I survived the Siege of Mandalore. And survival, in the end, is its own kind of war.